Okay, welcome everyone to today to the September Franchology webinar. We do one of these approximately every month. We call it the Franchise Clinic. I'm working on having Graham show up in a lab coat as the clinic as our resident doctor in locum, so to speak.
My
So
stethoscope is hanging on the wall, Rob.
yeah, that's it. We're ready to diagnose some problems. What we do on these sessions is we spend about an hour pinpointing what we think is often the real problem or the real problems that are causing significant issues in franchise or businesses. We talk about Graham's extensive experience in these things. So yeah, we'd like to invite you to, we'll spend sort of 30, 40-ish minutes going through the content. We've actually got quite a lot to cover today, so we'll try and get through it as fast as we can, but we'll have time for questions. Whether you're watching on LinkedIn, you can interact with us there. Both Claire and myself will monitor the chat and monitor the questions, so please do ask us questions as we go. You can also join us on Riverside if you registered in advance. We did send out a few messages with some alternative join links on Riverside. So that being said, today's session is about how to become what we call franchise ready for sustainable scale and growth. We kind of think that there's three elements to being franchise ready. There is being franchise ready to launch if you're thinking about franchising your business. There's being franchise ready to scale after you've created your franchise network, but before you're necessarily ready to scale things up without the wheels completely falling off. And then there's being franchise ready to exit. And we'll talk about all of those things. Hopefully, if there's demand, if people want to hear Graham's perspective on these things, we'll talk about all of these things in upcoming sessions. Today's session, so yeah, we are going to be running for an hour. I appreciate everyone's busy, everyone's time is valuable. You are on the right session, on the right webinar. If you're interested in scaling your franchise network, we will be covering how scale requires systems, strategy, people, and financing, and also the relationships between those things. Graham is going to, in my opinion, slightly ambitiously share 6 pillars. So we'll see how far through these pillars we get today. But we've got 6 pillars of scale. Obviously, without any of these pillars in place, things tend to fall over. We'll talk about the tools, partners, and categories that make them real. And we'll talk about how you probably need help in some capacity, because there's too many skill sets here to have all of this in your own head. So we'll talk about how independent assessments, things like territory mapping, funding, as well as robust financial and legal advice should align to set you in a good stead. We do have detailed notes that will come out next week on this. If you need to leave early, if you've got another meeting at past, that's all good. We'll get a full quality there will be a replay on LinkedIn straight afterwards, but we'll get a high quality replay out. We'll also get a 2-page summary notes out, so you can register for that. I'll put the link in the chat in a few minutes, pages.franchology.com/notes. By joining the email list, we'll also email you when we do future sessions. If you want to guide those sessions, guide what we cover, ask questions, the more the merrier. So just quickly, who are we? So I'm Rob Drummond. I broadly am in charge of the marketing here at Franchology. I've got Claire Howe on the call. Claire is the operations director here, and we have Graham, who's the founder and voice of the business. So Graham, I like to challenge Graham to introduce Franchology in 60 Graham McKinnon seconds. We don't get close to that, but let's see how we get on this month, Graham.
Okay, so Franchology in 60 seconds. Well, first of all, Franchology, in my humble opinion, is way more than just a franchise consultancy business. We are and aim to be a strategic partner for franchisors and for their franchise partners who want to do the following: unlock growth, improve performance, and build long-term asset value. Driven by the purpose of transforming franchising together, as well as my own personal why of making a significant difference to other people's lives. We combine deep franchising expertise gained from over 2 decades operating in the franchise space, as well as the last 6 years creating the franchise consulting, coaching, mentoring and training business that is now packed full of knowledge, insights and lessons learned that I want to be able to share with the franchise community. Bang.
We're working on it. We're working on
Well done.
it.
Pretty good.
60 seconds doing you.
Yeah. I think for me, it's clear that franchising, successful franchising, is all about people. It's all about relationships. So obviously, the psychology of that is important, and that's what we deal with. Okay, so let's dig into it. So why? I guess the question is, why does scaling and why does systemization matter? And Graham, I've put this pain point up front. I was wondering if you could share a time where this has not gone to plan. You've scaled up. You didn't have the systems. What hit the fan? How did that play out? What can go wrong?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the reality of the time spent in franchising myself, but also my time spent over the last 6 years working with other franchisors, it is so easy to think that actually, we have the foundations already in place. We have the systems, we have the processes, and thinking that we're absolutely ready. The reality, of course, is that any important level of scaling does require a real hard look at what systems, what strategy, what people, what financing, what do we actually have in place, and looking at it through the lens of what we're about to do. And to your point, Rob, I've certainly been in that position whereby I thought we had it, but we absolutely did not. And the reality of that is that all too often the pain of these things occurs when we realize that, this is actually way harder than perhaps we originally thought. So, I think, like I say, even when you have, if you've got an operations manual, fantastic. Even if you've got a franchise agreement, fantastic. But the reality of bringing in people and adding people into the equation, that's the point whereby, as much as you need a one-to-many approach as often as you can, there are still individual humans who have individual needs that need to be considered and thought through.
I've got the leaky bucket analogy in my head where, before you scale and decide to pour a whole load of water in this bucket, you need it to be as watertight as possible as far as you can be aware. And these are the principles in terms of, in some respects, you don't know what's going to happen until you scale. Like, it's hard to see where the water is going to pour through the holes in the bucket until you scale up. But I think the better the handle that we can have on what are those pillars going to be, the better.
Yeah, 100%. And again, that for me is something whereby it is possible to actually develop a strategy that does mean that you understand where those holes in the bucket are likely to be. And it is amazing how easy it is as well to have scenarios whereby things are not as strong and robust as you need them to be. And of course, what happens when you scale, if you don't have those foundations absolutely rock solid, then the reality of that is that you're just creating more and more problems which amplify the challenge that is already there. So, leaky buckets need to be avoided at all costs.
Yeah, and I've put here what we're aiming for is repeatability and consistency. And without repeatability and consistency, I think you can very quickly destroy your brand reputation and kind of undermine a lot of future success.
You definitely can. And the other point I think to add into that is that it's all about understanding how effective those systems and the repeatability actually is. And of course, it's one thing to have what you think is a system for a small number of people, but again, start to bring people on, particularly if you bring people on at pace, that you can be bringing in, 10, 20, 30, for example, new franchise partners. Well, that will absolutely stretch everything, which might well have been working when you had, 5 franchise partners, for example. So again, seems obvious, but all too often, the lens that we look through is not necessarily the lens that is required to be able to foresee these kind of challenges coming down the line.
Yeah. We've got a note here. I mean, can we just define what do we mean by sustainability in scaling? We've put here that it means actually starting with the end in mind and working back. I wondered if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things for me that I've learned over the years is about starting with the end in mind. And that includes talking about, things like exits and exit strategy, which applies equally to franchisors and to franchise partners. And I think particularly being clear about that is so important, because that will actually define exactly how you want to build the business.
Or as clear as possible, because obviously these things change, don't they? But
yeah, exactly. I think nothing is ever set. Nothing is ever set in stone. But even to think about it, even to think about what does success look like for, again, come back to for individuals, that, the definition of success will vary significantly from one individual to another. And I think, particularly when it comes to franchising, and thinking about, so if I take the example of a franchisor, one of the first things, particularly if it's a territory-based franchise, is to think about, well, what does this franchise, what do we want it to look like when it is fully developed? And again, all of the decisions that need to be made come from that kind of thinking. So, for example, I've been there personally. I've been there supporting franchisors who effectively give away much larger swathes of territory, for example. And they do that because they haven't necessarily really fully understood what the end should look like. Should there be 100 franchise territories across the UK, or 200 franchise territories across the UK, or is the goal to ultimately to expand internationally, or whatever it may be. And some of those things for some franchisors won't be right for them, and that's fine. But for others, that's that is actually what they want to do, build something of significant scale, perhaps. So,
the end you're working towards creates the constraints for decisions you make today.
Completely, and thinking about the word sustainable, anything that is created, that is planned for, that is part of the strategy, needs to be sustainable over the long term as well. And that obviously has implications when it comes to franchise support and, the kind of support that needs to be in place to actually sustain that level of growth as well. So sometimes it's, it's easy to have an aspiration, but again, the reality of that is that needs to be underpinned.
Can you handle it?
Yeah. And an investment. Scale, you can't scale on your own.
Yeah. I'm just going to run through what these pillars are. So we've got 6 pillars. So starting off, with strategic clarity, purpose, and vision. So you know what? Let's just go through these one by one. I think it probably makes more sense that way. So let's start with pillar 1. It doesn't surprise me at all, actually, that we've started off with this. So why is strategic clarity, purpose and vision, why is that the first pillar?
So it's interesting. So again, back in my early career within franchising, the reality, like many franchisors, we actually didn't have a clearly defined strategy at all. And I think there's a quote by Alice in Wonderland that says, that asks which way to go, and it's like, well, if you're not clear about where you want to go, then any road will do. It's fine. And so again, just taking us real back to basics, even thinking about the strategy, the long-term strategy, and the type, again, if we're thinking through the lens of a franchise or at this stage, what is the ideal franchise partner you want to bring on board? What is that profile? What does that avatar look like? And again, different horses for courses, if you like. It might be that if it's a franchise business, it's a lifestyle business, and you're therefore looking for franchise partners that would fit with that type of business. Absolutely fine. But again, if on the other hand you're a franchisor and you're looking to build your franchise ecosystem and your business at scale, let's stick with the 200 franchise territory analogy. It might be that what you want are multi-unit franchise partners to join the business. It might be that you want people with specific skill sets. You might even want investor franchise partners to join the business. So there's a whole host of options, strategic options, that ultimately are at our disposal, of course, but only at our disposal if we actually create the strategic plan in the first place. And that, for me, was one of the biggest lessons, because once we clarified what the strategy was, once we clarified what the strategic objectives were, it changed everything. And it changed everything because instead of just awarding a franchise to pretty much, anybody who cared to come along, who said they absolutely wanted to do it, we became far more choosy in terms of making sure that we got the right people that would fit with the strategy that had been developed. So sorry.
I think it becomes a sense check almost, doesn't it? For every decision that you make, is that going to lead us to where we've set that we want to go? Does that align with our vision and our strategy? And if not, we need to really challenge that. Is that the right thing?
Yeah, completely. And closely aligned to that, I'm obviously passionate about and the importance of purpose. So being really clear about what the company's purpose is, and again, picking up on what Claire just said, making sure that you're attracting, franchise partners, for example, and, suppliers, consultants, other stakeholders, making sure that whatever the organization's purpose is aligns with the individuals as well.
And the values, I think, and the beliefs. It's all kind of within that same.
You're getting a bit of feedback off your mic, Claire. Well, you might have to mute yourself, I think.
Claire's muted.
Yeah. That's a nice point, Claire, but we're not going to let you talk anymore.
I was just going to say, I'm always a fan of feedback, but maybe not that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so having clarity of that purpose and being really clear about the vision for the future, it is absolutely 101 when it comes to putting those foundations in, so that again, when it comes to scaling, you have got those principles already clearly laid out, and that it does act as a sense check, as Claire said, to make sure that you're attracting the people who are going to be completely aligned with that.
I think purpose has a resonance and a vibration to it that when you get it right, it's not just putting words on the wall or putting buzzwords around. I think people can kind of see through that.
Yeah, agreed.
And you can tell, like, it's not just franchising; it's any business that is going places has this kind of sense of, purpose about it that makes you want to be involved, I guess.
Yeah, and I think particularly, and you're right, it doesn't just apply to franchising, but it's amplified for me in franchising because there is this long-term relationship, this long-term commitment, the contracts. You want to make sure that you are, but we're not talking about, some sort of utopia. I mean, ultimately, we are still, at the end of the day, we're all human, but the closer you can get to being aligned, the better it is for everybody. And it does create inspiration, particularly, when facing challenges and whatever else.
So questions on this, by the way, if anyone does have any questions as we're talking, please post them. What does a good strategic plan look like? Like, is this a one-page document that you can pin on the wall type thing, or what should people be aiming for there?
So for me, it's actually both of those things. I think, there's a really important place to get the right level of detail down. And I mean everything. So, all of the aspects of the strategy that you need to consider. And that in itself might run to, 5, 10, 20 pages, depending on what that looks like. But I think one of the things that I found really helpful over the years is that once you've got that level of detail, when you've gone into the granular detail, if you like, looking at all of the aspects of a franchise business, including, recruitment, the franchise recruitment strategy, information systems, every single aspect of the business, to then boil that back down into something that is essentially for me a one-page dashboard. And those two things, so I think going through the level of detail is really important, but then being able to summarize it in a way which is, again, clearly articulated and can be clearly articulated so that everyone in the organization, and I mean every single person, understands exactly what the strategy is, and therefore how can they play a part in helping the organization achieve the vision that has been set out. It's amazing how often I've seen either the work not being done at all, and as I said back in the day, we didn't have a strategic plan at all, but either the work not done or done and then put in a drawer. And there is no value in that. And the whole point of it is that it actually drives decision making on a daily basis.
Yeah. In terms of vision, I'm being prompted by a mentor at the moment I've never been very good at sort of actually visualizing the end point of what I'm working towards. So I'm being encouraged to create a vision board of like, well, what is it that I'm trying to move towards? I wondered if you had ever done anything like that or encourage people to do that kind of work.
I have, and I do. And again, I mean, it's not necessarily for everyone, but I do think, like everything in life, I think it comes down to focus. And that, if you've got something that is visually in front of you every single day, when you come into the office, thinking about the things that are really important to you, thinking about your purpose. I mean, I said in the opening, the Franchology purpose is all about transforming franchising together. And therefore every action that I take, every action that we take as a team, we are thinking about, is this actually going to help transform not just the franchise relationship or the person or the people that we're working with, but is there something that we can do that will transform franchising and actually elevate franchising and move that forward? And the three words, transforming, franchising, and together, because for me, it's all about community. So it's not just 3 words that are written on a notice board. It's about really checking back in and thinking about, what am I doing? What are we doing? Is it aligned? And the same with vision, etc. So yes, if you've to have things clearly in front of you, I think is really helpful.
Very good. Our friend Simon Wise, hi Simon, is asking a question in the chat. Where does franchising talent fit into the strategic process? Do you need to identify and rectify limitations of franchising knowledge, I think he means, now in order to create and implement an effective strategy?
So great question. Thank you, Simon. I think the answer is it's absolutely crucial. I think when it comes to talent, again, whether that's within the franchise support team themselves, whether that is with the franchise partners, whatever element of people, I think it is absolutely crucial to get that right from the outset. And again, there's different levels, I think, of expertise needed in every franchise business. And again, I understand the challenge, particularly when franchisors are starting the franchising journey. So if at the beginning of that life cycle and they're just starting out, it's sometimes difficult to have, maybe don't have the budget to be able to have a fully blown franchise support team. But in terms of making sure that the franchise partners are supported, even if you can't recruit, full-time individuals or whatever, making sure that that talent is in place is absolutely essential, and that's a key part of strategic planning for me. So, yeah, great question.
Very good. I think let's move on to pillar number 2. So you just touched on recruitment there. So recruitment, onboarding, and independent assessments. Like, it sounds to me that onboarding is actually maybe a pivotal part. That was the part that stood out to me when I read that. What do people need to know about this?
Yeah, I think again the onboarding element is crucial, and I think if I simplify here for this conversation, I think there's the obvious part about the model itself. So again, from a franchise or franchisee perspective, making sure that the training and the onboarding process is absolutely robust. And yet also, I think still needs to be tailored to individuals, because again, just if we think about it, we all learn differently. There's a whole different host of a preferred learning style. So making sure that onboarding process is able to be tailored without doing everything on a one-to-one basis, but still being able to be adapted to the different learning styles that may be in the room. I also think as part of that, one of the things that I recommend, not necessarily early on in the franchise recruitment process, but definitely by the point that you are ready to award a franchise, I recommend using different tools such as, disc profiles or insights profiles. Again, not necessarily to exclude people, but just to understand where their strengths are, what their particular personality types are, so that we can openly and transparently address any of the things that are likely to become a problem.
I've never seen anyone get their disc profile and go, "Nah, that doesn't sound like me."
It's occasionally I do get people who question it, but I have to say you're right. In the vast majority,
it's a general rule. Yeah,
as a general rule, it's pretty accurate. And as I say, that for me is a key part of. As I say, it's not to use it as a stick to beat us with. It's just to be able to think about how can we How can we leverage the information that we have to be able to have a much better onboarding process? And I think the other thing to say about that is that timing is everything. So for example, I've worked with franchisors who are, on the surface, it looks like they've got a really robust onboarding process. But if the timing and delivery of each step in the process isn't right, and they're not ready to actually use the information, then there's another pitfall in the road, if you like, that can be hit quite dramatically, because if you end up forgetting half of, there's all sorts of research and stats about how quickly we forget things if we're not actually using it straight away. So, having that and having it in a way which is timely, but also making sure that actually what has been delivered has been understood. And again, when it comes to scaling, running a business, running any business, it's not easy. There's so many different priorities to be taken into account. So having an onboarding process that not only teaches in the right way, but also has the ability to check, as I say, that understanding has been fully taken on board and delivered. And I think, again, the point about independent assessments, from whichever part of the process, sometimes just having someone with a fresh set of eyes looking at what is there and can sometimes make the difference between, something that is good and elevating it to something that is great or outstanding. But all of those things, from the very first touch point, I think that franchise partner gets in touch with the franchisor, right through to the onboarding process. And in fact, whenever possible, I'm a real advocate of making sure that, it doesn't just come to an end at the end of 2 weeks or 5 weeks or whatever. It's got to be supported all the way through, and as that journey evolves. So.
Yeah, and we talked quite a lot about recruitment in a previous session, I think maybe the June session, but I think from a systemization perspective, it feels like it's important to be clear on exactly what these steps are. And yeah, it's the tiny noticeable things and making sure that it's clear what should happen next when certain things happen and making sure those things do happen.
Well, it's interesting. When I've said this before, go right back to my nursing days, which is obviously now many years ago. But one of the fundamental principles was see one, do one, teach one, and to be able to follow that process. If somebody can't actually teach somebody else to do what we are explaining, and that's a great tester, because if you can't teach somebody else, you've not grasped the basics of what we're actually talking about.
It's probably a nice connection there to Pillar 3 in terms of operating systems and documentation and territory mapping further to that. I think documentation is one of these unsexy topics that actually, when you see it implemented properly, is a mind-expanding thing. Like it can be a sexy thing. I wonder what you thought about that.
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing to say is, it's here as a pillar because it is so important, and yet I have been as a franchisor whereby we spent inordinate amount of times on the operating system, on the documentation, on the operations manual, only to find that actually almost no one used it. And that's, for me, that's the worst possible outcome, isn't it? That you've actually invested the time and the effort and the money in creating that, but then because it's in a format that actually it's too wieldy, it's not easy to access, particularly when you are at different points of the journey, and quite often these documents can be, absolutely huge in terms of content, whatever. So I think, I'm pleased to see that nowadays there is such, advancements coming down the line in terms of, again, I'm very minded of my last conversation with Penny Hopkinson, for example, and the work that Penny's been doing on Manual Magic, which I think is fantastic, and using, the technology with AI, etc., to be able to create, what is no longer a static, 50 or 100-page manual document, but to create this ecosystem.
And it's not necessarily coming from the top, it's coming from the people sometimes who are doing the tasks as well.
And that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because, in the days gone by, whereby, let's say we, not me personally, but there have been a lot of people over the years who have kind of operated as command and control, if you like. So everything coming from the top and flowing down to wherever that needed to go. But to your point, and to Penny's point, the reality of actually creating that from the ground up and creating that ecosystem where that is enabled is absolutely fantastic. Of course, there still needs to be, systems and controls around how that is managed, of course, but nevertheless, some of the most innovative developments, because let's face it, in business, we're constantly developing and improving whatever it is that we're doing, hopefully. But being able to capture that in a way which is still putting the franchisor in control, but actually getting things from the coalface is it is a game changer, really is.
Yeah, and that's going to help with this principle of reliability and consistency. If you, rather than trying to flick through a huge Argos style manual, if you've got a video that's been recorded on someone's phone that doesn't have a voiceover, shows someone's hands doing the job that you're about to do, and you can scan to that from a QR code or something, it's like, well, that becomes a living working document.
And 100%, and it also means as well, but the reality of life is that whenever you need access to these things, you need access to it in the moment. You need to be able to get the information, and for a lot of franchise businesses that are operating, way beyond 9 to 5 or whatever, when typical franchise support would be available. Being able to access that in a way which, I've got it, understand it, make the change and go, it's no longer nice to have, it's essential.
Let's just touch on territory mapping then, because I think we are going to cover this in more detail in a future session. But what do people need to understand at the top level?
Yeah, I think this very, very high level. The power of data, and my background is very much not from a data background, but I understand the value of being able to use the insights and the knowledge that can come from having territories mapped out effectively right at the beginning. That's assuming that it's a franchise business that requires territory mapping, which of course not every franchise business does. But if you are operating a territory model, as I say, I first became involved with territory mapping as a franchisor, probably 10 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. And I'm a real advocate of Stuart Lee and Atlas Mapping and Vision. I've used that system myself, so understand the power of it. But even from where it was, years ago to where it is now, the knowledge that provides in terms of actually making a significant difference for the franchise partners who are potentially looking at how to get the best return on investment within their community and territory, the insight and data that is available is just off the scale. So And again, literally, this has the potential to improve not just profitability in the short term, but long-term asset value.
Mm.
And if you get it wrong,
sorry,
Claire, I was going to say, if you get it wrong, it's so hard to unpick as well. Like
100%. Again, I've been there. I mean, I've been there whereby, particularly at the early stages of a franchisor's journey, if a franchisee asks for a bigger territory or an extension to a territory or whatever, it's so easy just to say, yeah, that's fine, no problem, because you think you're doing the right thing, but the long-term impact of that, and as you say, to try and unpick it is torturous. It really is. And the other thing I think, just to say on this one last point, one of the biggest challenges that I've faced and I see other franchisors facing is the question of expectation. And it's so often missed that actually expectations are so misaligned right from the get-go. So you get a franchisee who has an expectation of X, and you get the franchisor who's an expectation of Y. And because that hasn't been clearly articulated, discussed, nailed down right at the outset, you end up, you can regularly end up whereby the franchisor is dissatisfied because they're not getting the return on investment that they expected from the territory, and the franchise or franchisee relationship is impacted negatively because you have literally got two people who are knocking heads together, one who is very satisfied in terms of where they are, in terms of the input that they're making and the level of income that they're making, and the other thinking, I've blocked this territory, and have no chance of actually mining it for the opportunity that is available. So really,
I was going to see if I had any return on my mic, but yes, having not been around a territory-based franchise in the past, I was blown away just in terms of looking at the demographic, the penetration levels within certain opportunities. It's powerful stuff. It really is.
It is. And you still have a little echo.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'll mute myself again.
I'm not rushing to mute you, but there's still an I feel like this ties potentially to people capability, and I basically think that people are very capable. I foundationally believe that, but it's environmentally driven, and that environment perhaps comes from leadership and culture. I wondered what you thought about that, Graham.
So it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I've laid these out in this order, but you can easily move these about in terms of level of importance, and of course they are all important. But I think the first thing that springs to mind is that, and I can't remember whose quote I'm about to make, but the quote is that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
It's Drucker, I think. It's Peter Drucker.
Peter Drucker. Thank you so much for that. And I have to say, when I sit back and I think about my own journey in franchising, but also when I think about some of the most successful franchise businesses that I see, and some that I work with, when culture is at the forefront of effectively recreating the culture that made the business successful in the first place. Again, it is absolutely amazingly powerful.
How often does a business scale and you lose the essence of the thing?
Often. It's in my experience exactly that. I think particularly from a scaling perspective, what was perhaps the key elements of the founders' philosophy and culture and whatever. And if, in fact, Rob, as you know, I had 5 years experience of unraveling a franchise business that the original founder had sold the business to a new owner, and the original culture was lost overnight. But it was lost in a way which was absolutely disastrous for everybody concerned. But even the most well-intentioned business transfer, or as you say, as the business scales, this whole point of losing that culture that contributed to the success in the first place is way more common than most people perhaps really understand. So, I mean, one client that I work with right now, they have put culture at the forefront of everything they do, to the point that one of the founding members, his role is director of culture. So culture now has a seat at the boardroom table. And that, for me, is true leadership.
I love that.
It honestly, it's so powerful. Because again, the fact that culture has a seat at the boardroom table, every decision that is made is checked back against, is this actually going to help develop the culture that we set out to create, or is this going to take us further away from it?
Yeah. I kind of have the sense that leadership is kind of changing a bit. To me, the word leadership evokes this sort of masculine energy type thing, and I don't think that's what's necessarily needed. I think you've described obviously everyone has their own style, I guess, but you've described yours as being kind of human-led. I wondered if you saw things changing, or the need for a more empathy-led approach.
I personally, yes, I think in the world that we live in, with everything that is going on around us, there's never been more important to have an empathy-led leadership style as part of what we do. And I I've gone on record before about what I'm about to say. I genuinely think, I'm a fan of Simon Sinek. I think leadership is not necessarily about rank or title. It is about taking care of the people to the right of you and to the left of you. And I think in a franchise or franchisee relationship, I think that's absolutely crucial. I think, at the end of the day, I think as franchisors, we have a responsibility to recognize that people are entrusting their whole lives to us when they commit to investing in a franchise. But the same applies to franchise partners, whether it's their employees or whatever. I think it's just absolutely crucial to provide the leadership that people need. And that doesn't necessarily just fit with the style that I have or we have as leaders. I think we have to adapt and provide leadership in the moment that people need. And that's different. Sometimes we need to be visionary and extol all the virtues of being a visionary leader. But sometimes we need to be really human in the moment and recognize some of the challenges that people are facing. Again, when I think about the 20 years I've spent in franchising, in any franchise ecosystem, the whole of life is unfolding in front of us. So births, marriages, deaths, divorce, illness, mental health challenges, you name it, it's all happening. And I think it's incumbent on us to provide the leadership and create the culture that actually allows people to thrive, as opposed to just purely focusing on driving performance or driving growth or driving whatever. Because at the end of the day, we're all someone's husband, wife, brother, sister, father, whatever. That's and it's no longer, it's no longer just work or home. whatever we do at work, we take home, and whatever happens at home, we take to work.
Question from Simon: how do you ensure that a business never loses sight of its why, even as perhaps a founder steps back or other growth happens?
I think so. I guess the first thing. So again, thank you, Simon, for the question. I'll start my answer by it's something that should be lived and breathed and talked about every day. So I think, even just in practical terms, again, I remember one particular franchise owner who would start every session with, before we actually get into the session, just a reminder that, our purpose, our why is X. And therefore, and in fact, every board meeting, every franchise partner meeting, we would be talking about it and reinforcing the fact that this is what we're all here for. So I think embedding it across the business so that it's habitually talked about and rewarded. So I think, when it comes to recognition, for example, and, from an HR perspective, that absolutely support having reward and recognition systems, but actually making sure that we're calling out publicly when people are living and breathing our why, I think is really important. The second part to that, I have to say, is much trickier. I think when it comes to a founder who is moving on. However, again, I think at that point, it's really important to get the new leadership team to be to have such a transitional period whereby that essence and that sense of purpose is actually transferred, and therefore, when it comes to recruitment of that leadership team and the recruitment of the franchise support team, everybody who's involved in that ecosystem, I think having that as part of the recruitment process is really important and powerful as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about the new leadership team coming in and then being a continuation of those values, I guess. But yeah, I think it's tricky. So yeah, let's move on to pillar 5. So performance, profitability, and avatar alignment. I guess this is what everyone wants: performance and profitability. Why does this not happen, I guess, is the question, Graham.
So I think, first of all, on performance, some of this feeds back into what we've already discussed here on this chat. I think being really clear about, so again, in the franchisor franchisee relationship, having the expectations set correctly at the outset are key. But more important for me in that, and again, this is something that I see all too often, I'm really passionate about helping everybody be clear about their own hopes and dreams. And it's that part particularly goes to the heart of coaching with compassion, but which is now, there's now extensive neuroscience and research around what happens in our brains when someone is either coached or mentored purely for performance. And the reality of that is that actually doesn't deliver the results that we actually hope and think that it will. So
everyone with kids learns this the hard way, I think.
Yeah, well, it's interesting though. As I say, the neuroscience of it, and we don't have time to go into this today, but the neuroscience of it, all too often, actually creates what the researchers have called a negative emotional attractor in the person who's been coached for performance, and it, so first and foremost, that typically is either a short-lived success or very often it's a negative spiral that occurs. And I've coached literally hundreds of franchise partners over the years, and I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of what I'm describing. But yes, of course, ultimately, when you get those expectations aligned, and when you get people who are really inspired by the purpose that they are delivering, that's important, but also really aligned with their own hopes and dreams, that's what leads to profitability. And it's, of course, you've got to give amazing customer service. You've got to be outstanding at what we're actually delivering, whatever that service or product is. But yeah, I think for me, this is absolutely crucial. And it comes right back to the avatar alignment element of that, which means, it's not just about, I've been there whereby I've refused, people who have literally said, I want to join, I have the money.
Is your avatar your dream franchisee that you imagine walking through the door tomorrow?
Correct. Yeah. And so the closer you get to that, and, with all of these other things in place, then the profitability flows.
Yeah, we're back to it being an interdependent relationship eventually between franchisor and franchisee, and getting to that
Completely.
point, and that's what's going to maximize profitability and performance.
Indeed. Yeah.
As I'm in charge of timings, let me just say that we are going to overrun slightly today, probably by about 10 minutes. So if anyone does need to go on top of the hour, that's cool. We'll get the replay out, but yeah, we'll carry on. So pillar 6 is brand marketing and global readiness. My background is in marketing, so I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of where my brain wants to start. But is the marketing where people start, or is where does this sit? Because obviously, I think strategy has to come first, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think definitely it does. Albeit, as I said, all of these things are intertwined, aren't they? You can't scale without, having outstanding performance in each of these areas. And in this session, let's be honest, we're still scratching the surface. But I think, one of the key responsibilities, again, from a franchisor perspective, is to be responsible to promote and develop the brand. That fundamentally is part of what people are buying into. And I think, all of those things, including the brand values, again, coming back to the essence of what does it mean to be part of whatever the brand is. And there's no doubt about it that from a franchise partner perspective, one of the most important things when they get to the point of launching the business, then they want to know that the marketing support that has been wrapped around that, first and foremost, is the marketing strategy right? Is it actually being created in a way that's going to deliver the expectations for both parties? But also, what does that marketing support look like? Because one of the biggest challenges, again, that I've seen is that from a franchisee perspective, it's very rare that you get franchisees who are experts in marketing.
We've discussed about this, where many franchisees, I think, underestimate what is actually required. But the other thought I had, though, was that, to me, marketing is like fertilizer on a field. And you need the crops to grow. You probably need some fertilizer, but the temptation is like to just lay it on, to lay it on too thick, or to lay it on in the wrong places. And it's like, well, maybe with the right strategy and the right values and the right energy about the business, like, you maybe need a bit of marketing, but there's going to be an energy about it that creates this momentum as well. You can't use marketing just to paper over the cracks in strategy.
No, you can. And the other challenge is, we haven't really touched on this, but the importance of being well funded, the importance of actually having, a clearly defined marketing budget is crucial, both for franchisors and for franchisees. So, I think all too often, and of course, that's the last part of that, is that all too often when marketing doesn't work, the tendency is for people to stop spending.
Yeah.
Which, of course, is the most.
It creates a feedback loop, yeah.
100%. But again, it's one of the biggest challenges, and obviously we can have a whole session just on marketing. Of that, I've no doubt. But yeah. So
let's just mention, so going beyond, so we think those are the main pillars to get right, and with those pillars in place, you're probably, hopefully, be in a good place to scale. Let's just mention finance, banking, multidisciplinary support, because people are going to need support, I think, is the point.
100%. That for me, that's the key. So we've talked about territory mapping already, but thinking about the professional services. So, banking, yes, banking and/or any other funding providers, legal support, using franchise consultants, using the expertise that is actually out there, of which there's a huge amount. So I think anybody who's thinking of growing, scaling the business, I say this regularly: if you want to go somewhere, find someone that's gone there before. And that again, one of my clients, I remember she said the following: you either pay for support now, or you will pay for it later because of the things that go wrong because you don't know what you don't know. Either way, you're going to pay for it.
Was it Jim Collins who wrote Good to Great and described that you want the right people on the bus before you set off?
Yeah. And again, I think that is crucial. So, obviously the British Franchise Association, I've been a member of the BFA for years. I continue to be a member, support the organisation. I think that's really important. But yeah, I think, every aspect of running a business, from finance, banking, marketing, strategy, recruitment, every single aspect, it's unusual to think that you're going to have all those skills yourself. So surround yourself with people who can help you to get to where you want to go, but get there faster and more effectively. Because again, when all's said and done, I know it's, in some respects, when I go back to my nursing career, some decisions that we were making were literally life and death. But you know what? In franchising, it sometimes is as significant as life and death. And I've seen huge success with franchisees creating the hopes and dreams beyond what they even thought was possible. But sadly, I've also seen people who have lost, sometimes a lot and sometimes everything. So I think we should never lose sight of the human aspect of how important it is for us to get these things right.
Yeah, we talked about this with Jen Chapman-Buffin, didn't we, in August, about the mental health side of this as well. Perhaps not losing sight of that. And you don't necessarily, I think value is maybe the wrong word, but maybe we underestimate the importance of mental health until it isn't there.
Completely. So yeah. It's and again, I think all these things are amplified in the world that we live in today. It's tricky, but equally there is a massive amount of good stuff happening in the franchising community, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. We should celebrate the amount of people who are doing amazing things.
Let's just talk about the health check that you can do for people, Graham. So I guess the next step is figuring out, well, where are you at the moment in your franchising journey? What does your business currently look like? Where are the holes in the road that are probably underneath your feet that you can't see them? I wondered if you could talk a bit more about this.
Yeah, I mean, simply put, I mean, we've listed out here, which again will be shared post this webinar, but just thinking about, strategic vision and clarity, franchise avatar defined and validated, independent assessment completed. Have you had somebody check over what your plans are, what you're doing? systems, territory mapping tools, performance metrics, leadership capability, culture, brand and marketing alignment, banking, finance, independent legal, financial advisor support. All of these things, you know, even if you were just to take this list, post this webinar, and just score yourself on a, you know, scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 or whatever, and score yourself honestly. Just, you know, where are the gaps? And because I'm sure, you know, whoever's listening to this webinar, there'll be lots of things that you are all doing that are great, and, you know, you can put a tick in the box and be proud of. But the reality of life is that there are probably things that does require improvement. And even if what you're doing is great, you know, if you can move great to outstanding, fantastic. If what you're doing is good and you can move it to great, that's fantastic. If something requires improvement, you know, one of the greatest gifts I think anybody can get is to get the clarity they need to spot the things that are, as you said, Rob, under their feet, that right now you just might not see. Yeah. But equally, if there are gaps, you can rest assured if you're a franchisor, then your franchisees will be feeling that. And if you're a franchisee, then your team will be feeling the gaps for sure. So, really important just to think about that.
Yeah. So people can go to franchology.com/stars. I will just add that we are developing a free survey tool that people can fill in that will spit out some initial answers, an initial survey based on that will analyse where you are at the moment. That isn't currently ready, but if anyone has come with us this far today on this journey and would like to help us with that, maybe be a beta tester, help us make sure that it really does pinpoint an accurate assessment of where you are at the moment, just reach out to myself, Claire, or Graham, and yeah, we'd love to get your feedback on it. Got a few takeaways for people. Hopefully people have got their own takeaways. But yeah, Graham, perhaps you can just talk through these specific takeaways that you've given me.
Yeah, I think certainly, you know, KPIs, you know, I know it's easy to talk about, but, you know, if you're thinking about scaling, make sure you cover financial results, operational quality, growth behaviors, that franchise avatar alignment that we were talking about, you know, thinking about, you know, what do you need? What do you want? Is it single unit operators? Is it multi-unit operators? Is it multi-brand operators or investors? Just ensure that the financial models that you've got or that you need are created so that expectations are set, realistic, and built for scale. And profitability. I mean, yeah, we touched on that already as well, but, you know, profitability attracts investment, loyalty, fuels network growth. Ultimately, you know, cash flow management essential to ensure that the funds are available to invest in line with the business plans that have been agreed. So all of those things I think are really important. But if you want any help, if there's anything I can do, I'm always happy to have a exploratory, without obligation conversation. But equally, if there's anything from a commercial perspective that you think I or we, the team, can help with, obviously very happy to have a conversation about that. So
you got that. Success is not accidental. It's not overnight either. All of these overnight successes are never really overnight. They start off with a good plan. Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say.
It is definitely, I hope, fair to say. And yeah.
Well, I said we'd be done at 10 past. We are now at 10 past. So we will finish up here. I'm just going to check for any more questions. If you are still with us, if you've got any more questions for Graham on any of the 6 pillars that we've talked about today, this was a sort of top level overview. We are going to potentially develop this, potentially by talking through individual pillars in more detail. I'm also trying to nag Graham into running a live 1-day workshop on this. So yeah, without announcing anything, there's plenty of things that we could kind of delve into in more detail here. But yeah, if you've got any questions, show us up now. Otherwise, I'm going to end the call in about a minute or so. Claire, you've been listening, taking notes. What insights have you had from today?
The first is I might need a microphone for my laptop.
that we can fix. Yeah,
definitely. No, I think key points for me around the culture thing. I think I can see how quickly that can get lost. So particularly through the franchise network and every kind of delivery point, making sure that that's felt as well from franchise or franchisee perspective, and the planning before scaling, kind of looking at, I guess, competitor analysis, using the likes of Atlas mapping to make sure that there's opportunity, and just some of the planning that needs to go in before of taking those next steps, and also resource within the support team. Graham mentioned the example there where you've got 5 franchisees. If you were looking to take that to 20, being able to support the network adequately with the support team that you have there, you'd need to look at making sure that you've got adequate resource to make sure you can support them in their business growth. So yeah, a couple of takeaways for sure.
Yeah, super.
Thank you.
Not seeing any more questions, so we'll just say thanks for everyone who's been joining us today. We'll be back in a month or so. Yeah, we'll be in touch. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, everyone.